Hello sa lahat. Ngayon ay ang fifth na meeting ng ating RCXRF na book club, which is about sa book ni William Lane Craig ng title ay On Guard. So ngayon we'll talk about the fifth chapter ng title ay Why is the Universe Fine-Tuned for Life? Magiging format ng book club is that as your host, I will be leading ang flow ng discussion. So I will discuss muna or mention certain points na na-discuss ni Dr. Craig sa chapter. Then as we go along, mag-ask ako ng specific questions sa inyo for open discussion. And ang intention here is to make sure that we understand ang book, that we are also able to process ang information provided. I just want to mention na dahil this is merely a recap video, hindi ko include dito yung answers ng mga attendees, but I will just give my personal answers sa mga questions na yun when it was asked. So mapapansin nyo later, I'll ask a question, then I will answer it myself. So let's start yung discussion natin sa fifth chapter ng book. So sa start ng chapter, we see Dr. Craig citing Romans 1:20 saying, "Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made." Then, he talks about the Greek philosophers being amazed by the order na nakikita natin sa cosmos. Nagagalingan ng mga ancient sa constant revolution ng stars and planets. Ang academy daw ni Plato ay nag-take talaga ng time to study astronomy dahil para kay Plato, ang astronomy, ang science na mag-awaken sa man para sa kanyang divine destiny. Ang sabi ni Dr. Craig is that para kay Plato, may dalawang bagay na nag-lead sa tao to believe in God. Ang una is ang argument sa existence ng soul, at ang pangalawa ay ang argument sa order ng motion sa mga stars, at ang order ng lahat ng mga bagay na under ng dominion ng mind na nag-order sa universe. Ginamit ni Plato ang mga arguments na ito to argue against atheism, and he concluded na perhaps ay may best soul who he sees as the maker and father ng lahat. Isa siyang king na nag-order ng primordial na chaos at siyang reason kung bakit we see a rational cosmos today. Another thing na Dr. Craig added ay ang statement ni Aristotle na makikita raw sa lost work niya na entitled On Philosophy. Ito raw ay makikita sa isang fragment. Si Aristotle raw ay filled with wonder sa majestic na stars sa sky ng ancient Greece. And Aristotle concluded na ang cause nito ay isang divine intelligence. He imagined ang impact ng sight of the world sa human race na nag-live underground at never nakita ang sky. Ang sabi ni Aristotle sa On Philosophy ay, quote, "When thus they would suddenly gain sight of the earth, seas, and the sky, when they should come to know the grandeur of the clouds and the might of the winds, when they should behold the sun and should learn its grandeur and beauty, as well as its power to cause the day by shedding light over the sky. And again, when the night had darkened the lands and they should behold the whole of the sky spangled and adorned with stars, and when they should see the changing lights of the moon as it waxes and wanes, and the risings and settings of all these celestial bodies. Their course is fixed and changeless throughout all eternity. When they should behold all these things, most certainly they would have judged both that there exist gods and that all these marvelous works are the handiwork of the gods." End quote. Now, this begs reflection. Let's answer yung question ni Dr. Craig in light of the view ng ancient philosophers about creation. Go outside at night and look up at the sky. How is what you see different from what Aristotle might have seen? How do you think this difference affects the way people today think and feel about the stars and planets? Answer. Ang personal opinion ko rito is that dahil sa light pollution, ay ang mga tao will not be able to see ang mga stars sa sky in a way that they could appreciate more ang beauty nito. I remember going sa province before where I just admired ang beauty ng stars. Kasi parang nasa outer space ka and you see shooting stars din sa sky. I think dahil sa light pollution ay di na natin makita ang stars in that way. And dahil doon ay naapekto ng mga tao on what they think and feel, kasi yung grandeur or majesty ng creation ay eclipsed na. I think this difference ay iba sa beauty na nakita nila Aristotle. And thus, ang heart ng mga tao being spurred to think about a designer ng cosmos may happen less likely. Now, natapos na tayo in talking about the introduction, let us now proceed to the fine-tuning of the universe. Dito ay Dr. Craig shares na maraming astronomers daw dahil sa recent na discoveries ay nag-come sa similar conclusion with the ancient philosophers. Ang view ng scientists before ay that whatever ang universe might have been like ay if we give sufficient time and luck ay ang intelligent na life forms na tulad natin will eventually evolve somewhere. Dahil daw sa discoveries ng over the last 40 years, ay alam na natin na mali ang assumption na ito. Ang discovery ng astronomers is that very complex at delicate ang balance ng initial conditions na present para ang Big Bang would permit the existence ng intelligent life anywhere sa universe. Ang delicate na balance na ito ay ang tinatawag na fine-tuning. And ang delicate balance and complexity na ito ay considered to be beyond our comprehension. Now, Dr. Craig mentions na may two kinds of fine-tuning. Ang question is, ano ang dalawang kinds of fine-tuning? Please elaborate kung ano ang ibig sabihin ng bawat isa. Answer. Ang two kinds of fine-tuning ay ang constants of nature and ang arbitrary na physical quantities. The constants of nature, ang constants ay ang symbols na nag-stand for unchanging na quantities na makikita natin sa mathematical equations. Ito ay ang gravity, electromagnetic force at ang subatomic na weak force. So ang unchanging na quantities na ito ay tinatawag na constants. So pwede na magkaroon ng universe na governed by the same laws pero ang constants ay iba ang values. Ang actual na value ng constants ay hindi raw determined by the laws of nature. Depende raw sa values ng constants ay ang universe na governed ng same laws will look different. Sa arbitrary na physical quantities, dito naman ay in addition sa constants, ay ang arbitrary na quantities na ito ay put as the initial conditions kung saan nag-operate ang laws of nature. Dahil arbitrary sila ay hindi sila determined ng laws of nature. Ang example nito ay ang amount ng entropy sa early na universe. Ito ay given sa Big Bang bilang isang initial condition at ang laws of nature ay nag-take over and ito ang nag-determine how the universe will develop from there. If ang initial quantities ay iba, then ang laws of nature will predict a different universe. Question, what does fine-tuning mean? Answer, ang ibig sabihin nito is that ang constants and quantities ng universe ay mag-fall sa isang extraordinarily narrow range ng values in order for the universe to be life-permitting. Now, before we proceed sa examples ng fine-tuning, let's discuss ang question ni Dr. Craig about gravity. Question, imagine a universe in which the gravitational constant, G, was considerably stronger than in our universe. Do you think there could be galaxies in that universe? Why? Answer. Ang gravity ay considered as a universal na force. Long range ito, pero ito ay mahina. For the sake of argument ay let's make gravity stronger na same sa strong nuclear force which is 10 raised to 40 na stronger than any force of gravity or stronger than the force of gravity. Then ang mangyari is that i-pull nito lahat ng protons and neutrons sa buong universe and pwede magkaroon ng giant na black hole sa universe as a result. This makes it seem na impossible for us to have life sa universe if this happens. Furthermore, necessary for us to have a very strong force like the strong nuclear force. Pero dapat short range siya para hindi ma-pull lahat ng protons and neutrons sa buong universe. Also, needed na short range ito para magkaroon tayo ng atoms na may atomic number na mas mataas sa hydrogen. Ang stars ay said to be made mostly hydrogen and helium. If hydrogen lang ang element, and sobrang strong ng force na lahat ng particles ay pulled together, it seems impossible to have the galaxies that we have in the present. Now, I consulted this then sa isang friend ko na physicist and ang sabi niya is that if we assume na ang strengths ng gravitational attraction ay comparable sa strong nuclear force, then kahit ang mga hypothetical stars na purely made of hydrogen would collapse. It explains na sa context ng hypothetical universe na may extremely strong na gravitational force ay kahit ang 100% na hydrogen star ay mag-collapse and probably ay walang enough time to fuse para makaform ito ng helium at ng ibang atoms. Examples ng fine-tuning. Question. Dito ang question ay kung ano ba ang examples ng fine-tuning na given ni Dr. Craig sa book. Answer. Bago nagbigay ng example si Dr. Craig ng fine-tuning ay nagbigay siya ng numbers to give us a feel ng pagiging delicate ng fine-tuning. Ang una niyang binigay is that ang number of seconds sa history ng universe ay 10 raised to 17 or 1 followed ng 17 zeros. Sa video niya ay 10 raised to 18 ito. Ang number naman ng subatomic particles sa entire known universe ay around 10 raised to 80 or 1 followed ng 18 na zeros. Ang mga numbers daw na ito ay sobrang laki na they are simply incomprehensible. Now, with those numbers in mind, Dr. Craig gave us examples ng fine-tuning. Ang so-called na weak force, which is one of the four na fundamental forces ng nature, kung saan ay ito ay nag-operate inside the nucleus ng atom, ay finely tuned siya in a way na alteration ng value nito by even 1 part in 10 raised to 100 ay it would have prevented a life-permitting universe. Similarly, ay ang change in value ng cosmological constant, which is ang acceleration ng expansion ng universe, which is as little as 1 part in 10 raised to 120 ay nag-render na ng universe life-prohibiting. Aside from this, Dr. Craig also gave the initial na low entropy state ng universe na computed ng physicist na si Roger Penrose ng Oxford University. Ito ay calculated ng odds na mag-exist ang low entropy state ng universe by chance alone ay on the order of 1 chance out of 10 raised to 10 raised to 123. Ang number daw na ito ay inconceivable, na to call it astronomical ay isa itong wild na understatement. Ang fine-tuning daw dito ay beyond comprehension. Ang accuracy na kailangan ng 1 part out of 10 raised to 60 ay para kang nag-fire ng bullet toward the other side ng observable universe, which is 20 billion na light years away, pero natamaan mo ang 1-inch target mo. Marami daw examples ng fine-tuning na hindi raw sila mawawala as science advances. Whether we like it or not, ay ang fine-tuning daw is a fact of life, and ito ay scientifically well established. Now, before we talk about the possible objections of fine-tuning, let us discuss ang question na how does it affect us or how does it affect you to know that the universe is so precisely fine-tuned? Answer. Ang effect nito is that I get to appreciate more the knowledge and wisdom of the God of the Bible. Though mga Greeks would say na this shows ang handiwork ng mga gods, I have doubts na those gods would be this smart. After all, they are depicted in such a way na kaya sila i-deceive ng isang creature like si Sisyphus. Pero when you look at the fine-tuning of the universe, it seems to scream na ang best explanation for it that it was designed by an all-knowing and all-wise God. Ang sabi sa Psalm 19, 1-2 ay, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky proclaim His handiwork. Day to day pour forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. Dito ay makita natin na ang power, wisdom, and the pagiging worthy ni God of our worship is seen in what He has created. Ang sabi naman sa Romans 1:20, for His invisible attributes, namely, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Ang ibig sabihin nito ay clearly na makita natin ang attributes ni God through creation, and that wala tayong excuse dahil dito. It renders us worthy of condemnation. We will understand it more as we discuss further ang fine-tuning. Though for now, it's clear na knowledge natin of this fact should spur our hearts in humble adoration or worship of our God. A possible objection and answer. Ngayon, now we are able to talk about the examples ng fine-tuning. We will now talk about ang possible objections sa fine-tuning and how to answer it. So basically, I will read dito yung objections and I will give my answers kung paano ba dapat sagutin ng bawat isa. Objection. But if the constants and quantities had different values, then maybe different forms of life might have evolved. Answer. Ito ay minamaliit ang disastrous na consequences ng change in values and constants and quantities. Kapag sinabi kasi ng scientists ng universe ay life-permitting, then they are not only talking about present forms of life. Ang life na tinutukoy ng mga scientists ay ang property ng organisms to take food, extract energy from it, for them to grow, for them to adapt sa kanilang environment, and for them to reproduce. So anything na kaya mag-fulfill ng functions na yun can count as life. whatever form man ang i-take nito. And in order for life to exist, ang constants and quantities ng universe ay dapat unbelievably fine-tuned para masuportahan ang mga functions na ito. So kung walang fine-tuning, not even matter or even chemistry would exist, much less ang planets where life might evolve. Objection. But maybe in a universe governed by different laws of nature, such disastrous consequences might not result. Answer. Yung objection naman na ito misunderstands ang argument. Hindi kasi tayo concerned with universes na governed ng ibang laws of nature. Wala tayo kasing idea how those universes will be like. Ang concern natin is if ang universes na mga yun ay governed ng same laws of nature that we have, pero ibang values ng constants and quantities. Dahil ang laws ay the same, we can determine kung ano ang mangyari if ang constants and quantities ay mabago. And ang result nito ay disastrous. Among sa universes na governed ng ating laws of nature ay almost no chance na ang randomly chosen na universe would be life permitting. An argument for design. So ngayon na-address na natin yung some objections against fine-tuning. We'll now proceed sa argument for design. Dito, we'll discuss yung argument for the fine-tuning of the universe, which shows us kung ano ba ang best explanation ng cosmic na fine-tuning. Ang argument na ito ay simple. Premise 1, the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Premise 2, it is not due to physical necessity or chance. Conclusion, therefore, it is due to design. Now, before we discuss ang mismong argument, let's define muna ang terms nila sa ating argument. Please define ang ibig sabihin ng physical necessity, chance, and design. Answer, physical necessity. The constants and quantities must have the values that they do. Chance. The constants and quantities have the values they do simply by accident. Design. The constants and quantities were designed to have the values that they do. Now, sa premise 1, now we are able to define our terms. Let us proceed sa pag-discuss ng argument. Ang structure niya ay basically isang disjunctive na syllogism. Isa itong rule of inference kung saan we affirm by denying. So if may choices na binigay sa isang argument, if hindi totoo ang dalawa, then we can infer na ang natira ang totoo. If may ibang alternative na explanations maliban sa tatlo na mentioned, then pwede siya madagdag sa argument. Do kaya tatlo ay ito ang usual na sinasabi na nag-account for fine-tuning. So now that we are able to talk about the structure ng argument and talk a bit about premise 1, let us now talk about ang crucial na premise, which is ang premise 2. Ang sinasabi nito is that ang fine-tuning ay hindi due to physical necessity or chance. Let's start sa physical necessity. Ayon sa first alternative, which is ang physical necessity, ang universe ay dapat maging life-permitting. Ang constants and quantities must have the values that they do. Ang ibig sabihin nito is that ang value ng constants and quantities ay hindi pwede maging iba. Yun lang ang value na dapat mangyari. And dahil dito ay isang life-prohibiting na universe ay physically impossible. Now, ang question, how do we answer this alternative? Answer. Now, on the surface, ang alternative na ito seems fantastically implausible. It requires us to say na kasi na ang life-prohibiting na universe ay isang physical na impossibility. Pero, bakit need natin mag-take ng ganun na view? Ang constants kasi ay hindi determined ng laws of nature. So, walang reason for us to think na hindi pwede na iba ang values ng mga ito. To add, ang arbitrary na quantities ay mga boundary conditions lamang kung saan ay nag-rely ang natural laws for their operation. So parang wala namang bagay that makes them physically necessary. Dahil dito, we can say na need ng kalaban ng design argument to show evidence sa kanilang radical na assertion. And if wala, then ang alternative na presented nila is merely a possibility. Dr. Craig also talked about ang yet to be discovered na theory of everything. And on the surface, it seems to be a physical na explanation for everything, which includes ang fine-tuning. But ang label na ito ay misleading. Ang sabi ni Dr. Craig is that ang successful na theory of everything ay mag-enable sa atin na unify ang four na basic na forces of nature, which are yung gravity, yung weak force, yung strong force, at ang electromagnetism into a single force na carried ng isang kind of particle. Ito raw ay mag-result sa great simplification ng physics. Pero hindi raw nito ma-explain literally everything. Example na binigay ni Dr. Craig is that ang most promising na candidate to be the theory of everything ay ang tinatawag na M theory or superstring theory. Ito raw ay nag-work lamang if there are 11 dimensions. Pero ang theory mismo can explain kung bakit 11 dimensions lamang ang dapat mag-exist. Dahil dito ay ang M-theory cannot uniquely predict a life-permitting universe. Ang M-theory ay nag-permit ng vast range of different possible universes which are 10 raised to 500 or 1 na may 500 na zeros na pwede maging possible na universe. And all ay consistent sa same laws pero magkakaiba ang values ng kanilang constants and quantities. Halos lahat ng possible universe dito ay life-prohibiting, and in light of that ay we need an explanation kung bakit out of all the other possibilities ay ang life-permitting universe natin ang nag-exist. Hindi natin pwede sabihin ng life-permitting na universe ay physically necessary dahil based sa M-theory ay it's clearly false. Dahil pwede tayo magkaroon ng universe na iba ang value ng constants and quantities. So wala tayong evidence to think ng life-prohibiting universe ay hindi possible. Ang evidence natin, on the contrary, shows na mas likely for us to have a life-prohibiting universe than a life-permitting one. Chance. So let's proceed sa chance. Ayon naman sa view na ito ay sinaswerte lang tayo dahil it's an accident that the constants and quantities that we have ay nag-fall sa life-permitting na range. Ang question is, how do we answer yung alternative na ito? Answer. Ang fundamental na problem daw is that ang chances na ang universe na mag-exist ay life-permitting ay sobrang remote na unreasonable ang chance as an alternative. Now, in order to show yung probabilities ng chance, ay Dr. Craig gave 3 illustrations. Ang unang illustration is ang red dot na illustration ng physicist na si John Barrow. Minsan kasi ay ang mga tao would object na meaningless to talk about the probability ng fine-tuned universe natin to exist. Kasi we only have one universe. And dahil dito, we can say na out of every 10 universes ay may life-permitting na universe. And ang illustration ni John Barrow helps sa pag-answer ng objection na ito. Sa illustration na ito, imagine a sheet of paper and put a red dot dun. Ang dot na yun represent our own universe. Now, alter slightly one or more ng mga finely tuned na constants and physical quantities ng universe. This will represent another universe and ito ay i-represent ng another dot sa paper. If ang bagong set ng constants and quantities ay life-permitting, ay you will make it a red dot. If ang bagong universe ay life-prohibiting, ay make a blue dot. Ulit-ulitin mo raw ito hanggang sa mapuno ang paper ng mga dots. Ang maging result daw nito is a sea of blue dots with only a few na red. Ito raw ang sense kung gaano ka-improbable ng universe natin na maging life-permitting. We have a vast area of possibilities na magkaroon ng life-prohibiting na universe compared sa isang life-permitting universe. Ang second na illustration naman ay we will talk about ang lottery na illustration. Dr. Craig says na minsan ay mga tao will appeal sa lottery to justify ang chance alternative. Sa lottery daw kasi even though fantastically improbable na may manalo, ay nevertheless ay may isa na dapat manalo. Unjustified daw for the winner to say kung sino man siya na ang odds ko against my winning were 20 million to 1 and yet ay nanalo siya. Ang lottery must have been rigged. In the same way ay sinasabi nila na ang some universe na out sa range ng possible universes ay dapat mag-exist. Ang winner ng universe lottery would also be unjustified na isipin na dahil ang universe ay nag-exist, ay ito ay result ng design at hindi ng chance. Lahat ng universes ay equally improbable, pero isa kasi by chance has to win. Now, helpful itong analogy ng skeptic kasi helpful ito in making us see kung paano nila na misunderstand ang argument from design. Ang argument from design kasi is not explaining bakit ang particular universe natin ang nag-exist. Rather, ay nag-explain ito kung bakit nag-exist ang isang life-permitting universe. Ang lottery analogy nila ay misconceived dahil nag-focus sila kung bakit nanalo ang isang particular na person. Ang correct analogy using their own terms ay ang isang lottery na may billions and billions and billions of white ping pong balls na mixed together with just one na black ping pong ball, at we are told na if ang ball na makuha ay ang color black, then we will be allowed to live. If it's white, then tayo ay babarilin. Notice na ang particular ball na randomly selected ay equally improbable no matter which ball ang makuha. At ang odds against sa particular na ball na yun ay fantastically improbable. Per some ball ay dapat makuha. And ito ang point ng analogy ng skeptic. Ang point na yun daw ay irrelevant dahil hindi natin sinusubukan i-explain kung bakit ang particular na ball na yun ang napili. Ang crucial na point ay kung ano man ang ball na makuha ay it is overwhelmingly more probable na white ang makukuha imbes na black. Ang pagkakuha ng black ball ay no more improbable compared sa pagkuha ng particular na white ball. Pero incomprehensibly na more probable na you will get a white ball imbes na a black one. So if ang black ball ay ang nakuha, then you should suspect ng lottery was rigged para mabuhay ka. So dito sa correct na analogy, ay hindi tayo interested how you got the particular na ball na nakuha mo. But rather ay puzzled tayo na against the overwhelming na odds, ay ang nakuha natin ay ang life-permitting na ball rather than a life-prohibiting na ball. Ang question is not addressed saying na some ball has to be picked kasi in the same way ay sabihin nila na some universe has to exist. Ang tama is that kung may nag-exist na universe, ay incomprehensibly more probable na ito ay maging life-prohibiting compared sa life-permitting. Now, I asked a friend na magaling sa math about the illustration. Nung sabi niya ay ang billions and billions and billions ng ping-pong balls ay equal to 10 raised to 27 or 1 na may 27 na zeros. And if we need to get one black ping-pong ball to live, then we get ang probability by a number of the event divided by the number of possible outcomes. So ang probability daw nito is 1 divided by 10 raised to 27 plus 1. Ang result daw nito ay 0.28 na zeros bago dumating sa 9 na decimal. So we mathematically na sobrang baba ng chance talaga for us to get a black na ping-pong na ball. Now, ang third illustration naman ay ang 100 na marksman. Useful ito na illustration to show na mali ang argument na hindi natin need ng explanation for having a life-permitting universe. What they will say is that hindi natin need ng explanation dahil ang life-permitting universe that we have is the only universe we observe. For starters, ang reasoning na ito ay fallacious dahil ang fact na we can only observe ang life-permitting universe does nothing para ma-eliminate ang need for an explanation kung bakit ang isang life-permitting universe ang nag-exist. So dito, imagine ang nag-travel ka abroad at inaresto ka dahil sa drug charges. You are dragged in front of a firing squad na may 100 na trained na marksmen na nag-stand in point-blank range. You hear a command is given, ready, aim, fire. Narinig mo yung deafening na sound ng guns, and then you observe na buhay ka pa. And that ang 100 na trained na marksmen ay hindi ka tinamaan. Now, ano i-conclude mo? You wouldn't say na, well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that they all missed. After all, if they hadn't all missed, I wouldn't be here to be surprised about it. Nothing more to be explained here. Ito ay mali. Though it's true na hindi ka dapat ma-surprise na hindi mo na-observe na patay ka. Kasi if patay ka na, then you will not be able to observe it. Pero you should be surprised na you observe na you are still alive. Ito ay dahil sobrang enormous ng improbability na mag-miss ang marksmen. Take note na 100 sila na marksmen, tapos sila ay trained, and they will fire sa'yo in point-blank range. Dahil dito, it seems reasonable sa'yo to conclude that they all missed probably on purpose. At ang whole thing pala ay isang setup na ito ay engineered for some reason ng isang tao. Now, many worlds hypothesis. Now we are able to talk about chance and the illustration showing bakit hindi ito reasonable. Ngayon, we'll talk about ang many worlds hypothesis. So ayon sa hypothesis ay ang universe natin ay isang member ng world ensemble ng universes, or ito ay part ng multiverse ng randomly ordered na universes. And they are infinite in number. Kung ang ibang mga universe na ito ay nag-exist, then by chance alone ay life-permitting na worlds will appear somewhere sa world ensemble. Since ang mga finely tuned na universes ang may observers in them, then any observers na nag-exist sa world ensemble ay naturally ma-observe ang worlds nila to be finely tuned. Dahil dito ay hindi kailangan mag-appeal sa design para i-explain ang fine-tuning. Pwede pala siya ma-explain by chance. Now, ano ba ang pwedeng response sa many worlds hypothesis? Answer. First response. One way para mag-respond sa many worlds hypothesis is for us to show na ang multiverse mismo ay nag-involve ng fine-tuning. Para maging scientifically credible ang view nila ay they need a plausible mechanism na nag-suggest ng pag-generate ng maraming worlds. And para maging successful ang many worlds hypothesis, sa pag-attribute ng fine-tuning sa chance alone, ay ang mechanism na nag-generate ng many worlds ay hindi dapat fine-tuned. Kasi if fine-tuned ang mechanism na ito, then ang problem will persist. Paano ba natin ma-explain ang fine-tuning ng multiverse? Ang proposed na mechanism sa pag-generate ng world ensemble ay vague na hindi clear kung paano ang physics na nag-govern ng multiverse ay hindi finely tuned. Ang example na given ni Dr. Craig ay sa M-theory. If ang M-theory ang physics ng multiverse, then mag-remain pa rin unexplained kung bakit ang mag-exist ay dapat 11 na dimensions. Ang mechanism na nag-actualize ng lahat ng possibilities sa cosmic na landscape ay pwede mag-involve ng fine-tuning. So ang postulate raw of a world ensemble ay in itself hindi enough para ma-justify ang alternative na chance. Second response. To add, maraming mga theorists ang skeptical sa many worlds hypothesis. Dr. Craig asks kung bakit need natin isipin ang world ensemble ay nag-exist. Ang multiverse kasi ng bubble universes ay may beginning pa rin ayon kay Bohr-Vilenkin na theorem. And if that is the case, then ang mechanism na nag-generate ng bubble universes ay nag-work pa lang for a finite amount of time. So by now, we only have a finite na number of bubbles sa world ensemble. And this is not enough to guarantee an existence ng isang finely tuned na universe by chance alone. Also, walang evidence na nag-exist in reality ang world ensemble ng many worlds hypothesis. Third response. Also, ang many worlds hypothesis ay dinebunk natin sa ating discussion about the Kalam. Ang hypothesis na ito ni Ludwig Boltzmann ay refuted by the fact na vastly more probable na we observe a much smaller na region of order compared sa universe that we have. Yung computation ni Roger Penrose presses the objection forcefully kasi ang odds for us to get the initial low entropy condition ng ating universe by chance alone ay 1 chance out of 10 raised to 10 raised to 123. By contrast, ay mas probable pa ito sa odds ng solar system natin na it will suddenly form by the random collision ng particles, which is 1 chance out of 10 raised to 10 raised to 60. Ang number na ito, sabi ni Roger Penrose, ay utter chicken feed in comparison sa 10 raised to 10 raised to 123. Ang ibig sabihin nito is that far more likely na we should observe an orderly universe na hindi mas malaki sa solar system natin, since a world na ganun ang size ay more probable than a finely tuned universe that we have. Another problem sa many worlds hypothesis ni Boltzmann ay ang illusionism na mangyari as an implication ng kanyang theory. Ang small world kasi na may illusion of a wider and orderly universe ay mas probable compared sa finely tuned na real na universe. If we carry this to the logical extreme, this will lead us to think of the invasion ng Boltzmann brains. Ang most probable daw na observable universe ay composed ng single na brain na nag-pop into existence dahil sa random fluctuations. At ito ay may illusory na perception ng isang orderly na cosmos. This means na if we accept ang many worlds hypothesis, ay obligated tayo to believe na tayo lang ang nag-exist and that everything we perceive ay merely illusions. Pero walang sane na person ang nag-believe na isa lamang siyang Boltzmann brain. Given atheism ay highly improbable na may nag-exist na randomly ordered na world ensemble. Ironically, ang best na hook raw sa partisans ng multiverse ay they must maintain na si God ang nag-create and order ng worlds at ito ay hindi randomly ordered. Si God kasi could give preference sa observable worlds na cosmically fine-tuned. This means na para maging rationally acceptable ang many worlds hypothesis ay kailangan nito si God sa hypothesis. And if ang many worlds hypothesis ay nag-fail to explain the alternative of chance, then wala nang good explanation na natitira for the fine-tuning of the universe. Design. Now we are able to rule out physical necessity and chance. How about design? Is design a good explanation for the fine-tuning ng universe? Now, let's talk about one objection sa design being an explanation, which is ang argument ni Richard Dawkins sa The God Delusion. So ang question, can anyone give us a background kung anong objection na yun? Answer. Premise 1, one of the greatest challenges to the human intellect has been to explain how the complex, improbable appearance of design in the universe arises. The natural temptation is to attribute the appearance of design to actual design itself. The temptation is a false one because the designer hypothesis immediately raises the larger problem of who designed the designer. Number 4, the most ingenious and powerful explanation is Darwinian evolution by natural selection. 5, we don't have an equivalent explanation for physics. 6, we should not give up the hope of a better explanation arising in physics. Something as powerful as Darwinism is for biology. Therefore, God almost certainly does not exist. Question. In light of Dawkins' objection, how do we respond to this? Answer. Ang unang problem ng argument ni Dawkins ayon kay Dr. Craig is that ang conclusion niya na God almost certainly does not exist ay hindi nag-follow from the 6 previous statements niya kahit we concede na each of them ay true. Wala raw rules of logic na mag-permit na ganun na inference, and dahil dito ay plainly invalid ang argument ni Dawkins. At most, what we see sa argument ni Dawkins is that we should not infer na si God ay nag-exist on the basis ng appearance of design in the universe. Pero we see na ito ay compatible sa existence ni God, and we can use the appearance of design to justify ang existence ni God. Ang point dito is that when we reject design arguments for God's existence, this does not automatically prove na atheism ay true or that belief in God ay hindi justified dahil may plenty of other evidence na pwede mapakita for God's existence. Ang second problem naman ay ang mali sa mga premises ni Richard Dawkins. Ang step 5 ni Dawkins, which is that walang equivalent na explanation for physics sa design, ay nag-refer sa fine-tuning. And wala si Dawkins' explanation for it. Ang step 6 naman ay basically ang pag-express ng faith ng isang naturalist na perhaps sa future ay magkaroon ng equivalent sa physics na explanation. Sa step 3 naman ay basically sinasabi ni Dawkins na hindi justified to infer design dahil mag-lead ito sa larger problem na who designed the designer. Dito ay we can see 2 problems na presented ni Dr. Craig. Ang first problem of step 3 is that hindi natin kailangan to explain ang explanation. Ang claim ni Dawkins ay flawed on 2 counts. Una, ay para ma-recognize natin ang explanation as the best, ay hindi natin kailangan to have an explanation ng explanation. Ito ay isang elementary na point sa philosophy of science. Kung ang archaeologists na nagdig sa Earth ay nakadiscover ng things na nag-look like arrowheads and pottery shards, ay magiging justified sila sa pag-infer ng mga artifacts na ito ay hindi chance result ng sedimentation and metamorphosis. But sila ay products ng isang unknown na group of people kahit wala silang explanation kung sino ang mga tao na ito at kung saan sila nanggaling. Similarly, ay if ang mga astronauts ay nakadiscover ng pile of machinery sa likod ng moon, ay they will be justified to infer na product ito ng intelligent na agents kahit hindi nila alam kung ano or sino ang mga agents na ito at kung saan and kung paano sila nakapunta doon. So para ma-recognize the best ang explanation ay hindi natin kailangan to explain the explanation. In fact, ang requirement na ito ay mag-lead sa infinite na regress ng explanations, and dahil dito ay wala ng fact ang pwede ma-explain and that science would be destroyed. Ito kasi ay dahil if ang explanation ay dapat maging acceptable, then kailangan natin ng explanation for it. And then kailangan natin ng explanation of an explanation which will lead to nothing being explained. So sa case natin, at hand ay para ma-recognize ng intelligent design ang best explanation ng appearance of design sa universe, ay hindi natin kailangan to explain ang designer. Whether may explanation ng designer, ay it could be left as an open question for future inquiry. Ang second na problem ng step 3 ay that God is simple. Si Dawkins kasi ay iniisip na sa case ng divine designer sa universe, ang designer is just as complex as the thing na kailangan natin ma-explain. And dahil dito ay walang explanatory advance ang nangyayari. Ang objection na ito ay nag-raise ng maraming kinds of questions sa role na played ng simplicity sa pag-assess ng competing na explanations. For example, sabi ni Dr. Craig na maraming factors aside from simplicity na winaway ng mga scientists para ma-determine ang best na explanation, tulad ng explanatory power and explanatory scope. Ang explanation na may mas malawak na explanatory scope ay pwede na less simple compared sa rival na explanation. Pero ito ay to be preferred dahil it explains more things. Ang simplicity ay hindi lamang ang only criteria sa pag-assess ng series. Nevertheless, ang fundamental na mali ni Dawkins is that he assumes na ang divine designer is just as complex as the universe. Ito ay plainly false. Si God bilang isang pure mind na walang body ay isang simple na entity. Ang mind or soul ay hindi physical object na composed of parts. In contrast sa contingent and variegated na universe, kasama ang constants and quantities nito, ay ang divine mind ay simple. Of course, ang mind na ito ay may complex na ideas tulad ng thinking, but ang mind mismo ay isang simple na spiritual entity. Si Dawkins ay obviously kinonfuse ang ideas ng mind, which could be seen as complex as something na identical sa mismong mind, which is simple. Dahil dito ay ang pag-postulate ng divine mind behind the universe ay mas nag-represent ng advance sa simplicity. Now, before we go sa conclusion, let us answer 2 questions in light of our discussion about the objection ni Dawkins. Question, given the flaws sa reasoning ni Dawkins, how do you account for the huge popularity of his book? More than 1.5 million copies sold. What other than logic might explain its popular appeal? Answer, I'm not sure how to account for the popularity ng book ni Dawkins. I've not searched kasi if may survey ba of those who bought the book, like demographic nila, religion, or kung ano bang specific reason nila for buying it. Though as a Christian who believes na sa infallible word ni God, I could say reasonably na question why books like yung kay Dawkins ay popular is not really because of logic, but it is popular because the human heart, apart from the regenerating power ng Holy Spirit, ay rebellious against God. They suppress ang truth by their wickedness. Nasabi sa Romans 1:18-23, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Sabi rin sa 2 Corinthians 4:4 ay, in their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Dahil dito, it's clear ng human beings dahil they are dead in sin, apart from the saving power of God, ay by nature ay they rebel against God. Ang mangyari dito ay dahil hindi nila love ang truth. If you give them truth, you give them more material to misrepresent. They will go to materials that can help rationalize and justify ang kanilang unbelief. Pero aside from the sinfulness ng man, ang devil din mismo ay nagblind sa mga unbelievers to prevent them in seeing the light of the glory of God kay Christ. Question, if there really is a designer who fine-tuned the universe, what can we learn about him from the intricacy of the fine-tuning that is needed to create a world like ours? Answer, the short answer ko rito is that we can see na God is all-knowing and all-wise. I remember yung video ng Reasonable Faith on the applicability ng mathematics sa natural world. May part kasi doon where it is argued na si God ay pinili to create the world according to the plan he had in mind. The video cited the first century Jewish philosopher na si Philo of Alexandria, saying na kapag a king wants to build a city, ang trained na architect would first design sa mind niya a plan or a blueprint ng lahat ng parts ng city na dapat i-complete. After nito ay magbigyan ang architect to create the city out of stones and timber, and he looks at the model to make sure na ang city ay done according sa plan na created. In the same way, ang mathematics at physics daw ay nag-work so well together Dahil ang same mind na nag-design ng universe on a mathematical model is the same mind na nag-create ng universe sa same na mathematical na model. And dahil dito, ay we see a master architect na nag-transcend sa mga architects in this world. Ito ay dahil he is all-wise and all-knowing. Only a God na may ganong attributes ang able to create a finely tuned universe like ours. Conclusion. It is due to design. So, in light of our discussion, we're able to examine ang three alternatives such as ang physical necessity, chance, and design. And we see na ang design ang most plausible among the alternatives. Dr. Craig says na si Plato and Aristotle would have been gratified sa vindication ng modern science sa kanilang views. Dahil dito, we have a third argument na pwede magamit as a cumulative case for God's existence.